Hi dear good novelists, welcome to our second episode of Good Novel podcast. This is your host, Harry.
And this is Sissy.
In our last episode, we have talked about the first important element of novel writing, theme. We have discussed what a theme is, why it's important, and how we use it to conquer the beginner's block.
Yes, it's important to know what your theme is before writing.
Another point to add. A story can actually have multiple themes. Like for the same story, different readers may come up with different main ideas.
Yeah, remember our homework? To find a theme for Romeo and Juliet. We've received more than a dozen assignments, and surprisingly, not two answers are completely identical.
Yes, this is because there's no universal theme for Romeo and Juliet. You may read Romeo and Juliet as a love story and find the theme true love prevails all social conventions. Because in the story, two young men from the rival families end up together.
Yes, and you may as well find a theme saying Romeo and Juliet is about destruction. Blind love of young people can lead to their own demise, as the young couple die at the end of the story. Both answers are correct.
Right. Romeo and Juliet is a very complex story embedding many themes. This exact complexity has contributed to its everlasting glamour that has lasted for hundreds of years.
Yeah, but I think for beginners writing a story, it's good to start with only one theme and try to make this theme as convincing as possible. An expert will know how to weave different themes into one story, but that requires long-term practice.
Right. As the old saying goes, if you want to learn to run, you have first learned to walk.
That's right.
Alright, so we have understood the idea of theme. Our next step in writing is to consider the genre of our story. So that will be our topic of today.
Genre. We all know what genre is. When we post stories on GoodNovel, one of the necessary steps is to select a genre, whether it's a romance, fantasy, science fiction, adventure, horror, etc. But why is genre so important? I mean, why should I even listen to this episode?
It's a to be or not to be question. Okay, before we go gentle into the good genre, I need you to imagine this situation. You and your boyfriend go to a restaurant to have American brunch. You ordered yourself a omelette. But then what? You wait for half an hour and the waiter brings you a plate of scrambled eggs. How would you react to that?
Of course, I will feel disappointed.
And the waiter explains, don't be so mad. It's still eggs and it's delicious. You can try this out.
Yeah, I know it's still eggs, but it's cooked in totally different ways. I mean, it's not what I came for.
I know. No matter how good the scrambled eggs are, you will still be angry. For that is not what you have ordered, not what you have expected. This is exactly how readers and audiences would react when they read or watch something out of their expectation.
Well, I don't know. As a reader, I like it when a story surprises me with something unexpected. I think that's also what most writers want to achieve, to surprise their readers and make them curious of what's happened next.
Yes, it's good for writers to be creative, make some changes to the old patterns and provide something different for their readers. Like every writer wants to do that, right? To create something new, and we highly encourage them to do so. But there's something that can be changed, some conventions that can't be broken, otherwise you're risking to lose your readers.
Harry, I think you're being too dogmatic.
Yeah, you can call me dogmatic. Let me raise another example to explain this. Cici, in terms of film, what's your favorite genre and what's the genre you dislike?
Well, in terms of films, I like romance and sci-fi, but I hate war films.
Okay, now imagine this. You saw a film poster showing a couple kissing under the tree with the name When Love Rings the Bell. You thought, it seems like a sweet romance story. I can do some romance. So under this expectation, you bought the ticket and walked into the theater. Then you find the film full of this kind of boom, bang, big explosions, while love affairs only play a minor role. How would you react to that?
I feel cheated. I came for a love story, but what I got instead, I would be so confused and so lost.
Yes, you feel cheated, your time wasted, because the movie violates the basic expectations you have for its genre. A romance must be about love, not about the kind of boom, boom, big explosions, this kind of action movie things. What will you do if you find your boyfriend cheating on you?
Well, I will leave him for sure.
Yes, and your readers will do the same if you write an adventure story under the genre of romance.
Okay, well, this makes more sense to me now.
So, the answer to your question, genre is important. It helps readers to find the stories they like and helps the writers to secure their readers. Readers come to your story with certain anticipations, and you, as a writer, must anticipate their anticipations and satisfy their demands. Only then will they become your loyal customers. But to do that, you have to first master the genre you are going to write and know about its conventions.
Okay, so how do we become masters?
First of all, we have to read stories of this genre, breaking them down into elements of setting, role, events, and value. Then ask yourself, what do the stories in my genre always do? What are its conventions of time, space, character, and events? You are an expert of romance stories, right, Sissy? So what do you think are the conventions of romance?
In terms of characters, a romance story must have two people as protagonists who love each other and want to be together. And in terms of events, there must be an encounter incident in which the two protagonists meet and fall in love, and their relationship must be tested with obstacles or, say, forces preventing them to be together. And they will have to struggle to combat the doomed fate with one ultimate goal in mind, to be together.
Right. These are the exact conventions for writing a romance story. So when you analyze the love stories throughout the time, you shall see the same conventions repeat themselves again and again. For example, Romeo and Juliet, we have told the story about 1,000 times, right? The encounter event happens in a ball when the couple meet each other and fall in love at first sight. However, they can't be together because there are preventing forces, obstacles, which is their families, who have this kind of age-old vendetta and won't allow them to be together right away. The couple, therefore, are forced to battle against fate.
Yeah, but sadly, they failed.
Yes, and that's why it also belongs to the genre of tragedy.
Well, I think the same conventions can be found in Titanic. Also in the ball, Jack and Rose fall in love at first sight. The preventing force for them is the gigantic social gap. Rose is from high class while Jack is lowborn. The couple have to defend their love against the conservative opinions.
Yes, and it's another tragedy. The lovers are separated by death this time.
Well, compared to Romeo and Juliet, their struggles are much more successful. I mean, if the ship didn't sink, they should live a happy life ever after?
I think so. Anyways, the encounter events we have talked about and the preventing forces, the struggles for love, these are the elements of all romance stories, and you should definitely follow the tradition to include all these elements in your story. You shouldn't, for example, tell a love story without the struggles, like a couple meet, fall in love, get married, bear a dozen children, and then live a happy and normal life until death do them apart. I think this is definitely not what most readers come to a romance for.
Yes, that's true. No one would like to read a plain love story.
Yes, romance readers expect to see the couple struggle. Give them what they want and torture your protagonists with these obstacles.
Oh, That sounds so cruel.
Yeah, kind of. But that's their anticipations for the romance stories.
But won't these conventions keep the writers from being creative? I mean, these conventions are like barriers, restraints, allowing this, not allowing that. You have to obey the rules. You see? This sounds too arbitrary.
Well, don't think of genres as your enemy. It's actually your friend. It helps you to secure your readers. Genres and their conventions do not actually inhibit creativity, they inspire it. They discipline us as to what to do, but we are actually boneless as to how to do it. Readers expect to see the conventions, but they also expect to see you fulfill them in a very unique way, to see you reshape them, exceed their expectations, and give them what they had hoped for, and a little bit beyond that. For example, they are all familiar with the Romeo and Juliet conventions set in, say, Middle Ages, right? But what about a same Romeo and Juliet story happens in outer space? What about the couple are actually gay? Or they come from families of vampires and werewolves?
The art of telling the old conventions in a new way.
Right. And that's how we write good stories. We stick to the conventions and surprise our readers with a little bit surprises and not too much. You know, I once read a story which labels itself as romance, and it does play according to the conventions at first. The two protagonists fall in love, get familiar with each other, encounter some sort of preventing forces and struggle against them. And eventually they both die in a car accident.
So far so good. A dark romance with a bad ending. I like it.
Yeah, if that was the ending. But that's only half of the story. In the next half, the couple become ghosts and start haunting the streets on which the accident happened. And some sort of ghost detective came to solve the problem. The whole story turns to a new supernatural episode.
What a disgusting chop suey. If I were the reader, I would contact the GoodNovel editor and get my money back.
Yeah, exactly. So the second half of the story is not a romance anymore. It changed to a different genre, which is horror. That definitely violates readers' expectations and will piss them off.
Okay, we have talked a lot about the conventions for romance stories. What about other popular genres? For example, adventure? That's also a common genre. What do adventure stories have in common?
Stories of this genre also share a conventional plot, in which the hero, due to some incidents, has to leave its original life behind and steps into a different world, where he goes through a series of exciting explorations, overcome all sorts of difficulties, and eventually comes back to its original life. In short, adventures are there and back again stories. From ancient Greek to modern day literature, hero stories all conform to this ever-enduring tradition.
So you are an expert of adventure stories.
Kind of, yeah.
And what about fantasy and sci-fi? They're also genres, right?
Right. However, they are different from romance and adventure. Instead of setting conventions for plots, they set conventions on world settings. A fantasy story happens in a world with some kind of paranormal elements that not exist in our current world, like dragons, dwarves, elves, and of course, some sort of magics, right? A sci-fi story, on the other hand, must feature a world that has some sort of technologies that none exist in our current world.
And also, we have paranormal romance. That's another popular genre.
Yeah, it's actually a subgenre of romance category. Paranormal romance, literally not normal romance, involves all kinds of love stories that are abnormal in some regards. For example, werewolf stories, they often feature this kind of marking or imprinting system, right? The werewolf marks its lover and they are bound together for eternity. This kind of thing definitely not happen in normal love relationships. The love between a time traveler and a normal girl is also a paranormal romance, which justifies the time traveler's wife, the very classic sci-fi movie, as a paranormal romance.
Now I understand. So basically, what you're saying is that each genre embodies some unique conventions. Some genres set conventions on events, like romance, adventure, or mystery.
Right.
And some on world settings, like sci-fi, fantasy, and there are also genres of characters, right? Like werewolf. One of the protagonists must be a werewolf.
Yeah.
And new adults' stories must have protagonists over 18 years old, while young adults tell the stories of teenagers.
Yes, and you can tag a story with multiple genres. Often you'll find a werewolf story with the tag paranormal, romance, and young adults. These tags gives you some basic info of the story. You will expect it to be a love story featuring the abnormal romance relationship between a werewolf and a human, and very likely this story happens in a high school.
So can we do this super crazy crossover, like combining all the genres we have talked about, and write a story, say, sci-fi, fantasy, werewolf, romance, adventure?
Yeah, theoretically. But if you do want to write such a story, you will have to prepare yourself for a huge mess. You will have to involve all the conventions of your selected genres. Like for the sci-fi, you will need to depict one non-existent technology. For the fantasy, some supernatural creatures. And for the romance, how the two people meet and fall in love, how they overcome difficulties, right, and struggles. And what else? Adventure. You also have to tell a story about someone step into a strange world, deal with all kind of challenges, and get back to the normal life.
Oh, well, that sounds a bit nasty.
Yeah.
I don't think an author can handle so many elements in just one book.
That would be just a little bit too much. As editors, we often come across this kind of stories that contain maybe too many unnecessary elements, and find a protagonist who is a werewolf, a CEO, and the head of the most powerful mafia, who can wield the thunderbolts as its weapon.
Yeah, that reminds me of some stories.
Yeah, so here's notice for beginners. Compiling cool elements doesn't make it a cool story. The reader simply would be super confused, like, who am I? Where I am? What I was reading?
Yes, I think it's okay to cross 2 or 3 genres. Just don't be too greedy when you start writing.
Yes.
Just try to focus on 1 or 2 genres and cover all their conventions with your story. So, okay, this is all for today's episode. Hope this being helpful, my dear good novelist. This podcast is presented by Cici and Harry, senior editors at GoodNovel.com. If you like our podcast and video so far, smash the subscribe button and share it with your friends.
Please do. In our next episode, we will still be focusing on genre and talk about how should we find the best genre that suit best for our story. And we will also be discussing a popular subgenre of romance, which is the CEO romance, in details. We will talk about some do's and don'ts when doing this kind of specific genre.
And don't forget the homework for this week.
Right.
Share with us what are the genres of your stories and what are the conventions to follow.
Again, you can submit the homework to our email, writers@goodnovel.com. The deadline will be September 6th. Each submitter will receive 500 coins as a reward.
Yay, thanks for listening. Enjoy your writing and may the muse be with you all.
Bye bye.